Hello, Luke here. In this video, I'm going to go through and show you how to use Ansible to configure and format disks on a Windows Server machine, actually two Windows Server machines. And this goes along with a blog post that I did a few weeks ago. A few weeks ago, determining on when you're watching this video, could be years. But anyway, it's titled Ansible by Example, Simplifying SQL Server Disk Preparation on Windows Servers. Uh, I know if you're from the Linux world or you manage Linux, you may be already familiar with Ansible. But if you're coming from a Windows background, Ansible may be something completely new to you. If it is, I would start with Jeff Geerling's book, Ansible for DevOps. He provides a lot of great information on how to get started with Ansible. Most of that is focused on Linux machines, but there is a section for Windows. He will go into a lot more detail on Ansible playbooks and uh, collections, things of that nature, where I'm going to be mostly focused on using Ansible to configure and manage Windows and SQL Server environments. You can find that blog post that I'm referencing over on my site, automatesql.com. Just jump into the blog and search for Ansible, and you should see it come up. I have also created a GitHub repository to go along with this series. Uh, it's Automate SQL and then Ansible for SQL Server DBAs. And then finally, I am considering creating a course over this topic. Of course, the course would go into a lot more detail, but if you're curious about that, you can head on over to automatesql.com/Ansible and sign up for the wait list there, just so that I know if there's no one interested in it. Of course, I'm not going to build a course, but if you are, I'll consider that. But let's go ahead and jump right into it. I'm going to go ahead and go off the screen. And I wanted to start with showing you kind of my lab environment setup. I am using VMware Workstation Pro 17, and I have one server. These are all Windows Server 2022 Evaluation Edition servers. DC1 is my domain controller. SRV1 is one of my target servers that we'll be configuring today or formatting disks today. SRV2 is the second target server. SRV3 is going to be my Ansible controller. On SRV3, I do have Windows Subsystem for Linux installed and an Ubuntu distribution in place. I do use Visual Studio Code there with the Ansible extension, so if that's something you want to get set up. I've got another blog post over setting up an Ansible controller using WSL. You can find that over at automatesql.com as well. Before we get started, we'll take a quick look at SRV1 and 2. We'll jump in to Explore, and you can see that I only have the C drive configured currently. But if we look at the VM settings, you'll see that I have 3 other disks attached to it. Those are all NVMe disks. The first one will be used for TempDB, the second one will be our data drive, and the third will be our log drive. SRV2 is configured in exact same way. So now I'm back on SRV3. I'm going to go ahead and jump into Visual Studio Code. Again, you can find this playbook out on GitHub, and I'll put a link to it as well in the description. If you're not familiar, if you're completely new to Ansible, of course, start by installing Ansible and Windows Subsystem for Linux. Go through those blog posts first. They have some very lightweight examples that you can get started. And then, of course, also check out the Ansible docs to get more information there. The first step is to set up a host.ini file or your inventory file. And I've got these 2 servers in a group called SQL servers. They're just placed in that group. And then these are the variables that I have defined for that's the SQL Servers group. We're going to be using WinRM to connect to those servers, and then I'm also going to be using Kerberos instead of NTLM to connect to those. The Ansible port that we're going to use is 5986, and we're going to ignore any cert validations that I'm using because I'm using self-signed certificates on server 1 and 2 for now. The remainder of these variables, you can find more information just in that blog post that I referenced. And then we're going to go ahead and switch into the playbook. So this playbook is _diskprep.yml. These are all YAML files. So they'll all start with 3 dashes. And then we're going to give our play a name. So this is going to be initialize and format disks. The host, or our target host, is going to be SQL servers. So you'll see in a second when we run ansible-playbook, we'll give it the host.ini file as the inventory, but this playbook will only be performed against any servers in the SQL servers group. So for instance, if we had another group here called I don't know, maybe Postgres SQL servers, or Postgres SQLs, and then some server names under there, this playbook would only be performed against the SQL servers group. And we're going to define our task. The first task we're going to do is get disk facts from Windows host. So by default, Ansible will get a lot of facts or information about the targets, but it doesn't get the disk facts. So that's why we're doing that here as the first task. And you can find a lot more information about each one of these modules out on Ansible docs as well. So this one will retrieve and output detailed information about the attached disks of the target and its volumes and partitions if existent. We're going to use those facts as we continue through our different tasks. We can the first step after that is to output disk facts, so we can comment this out, but I do want to show those facts and what they kind of look like at the within the terminal window. So we're using Ansible's built-in debug module for that, and we're just going to output ansible facts.disks and the first disk. We have 3, but we only want to look at the first one here. The next task we do is we're going to initialize those disks, but we're going to filter out any disk that already have a partition. So we're saying only when the disk that we're looking at from this loop has a raw partition style, so meaning it doesn't have a partition, and then the bus type needs to be NVMe. You could have a situation where you've got multiple types of disk attached, so they could be iSCSI, could be fiber channel, could be SCSI. We're going to focus in on NVMe, and I'll show you that in the disk facts in just a second. So we are using Ansible's built-in loop functionality. So we're going to loop over any disks that meet this criteria, and then we're going to initialize those. The next step or next task, we're going to partition those disks using the Windows.Win partition module. We're going to assign a drive letter and the disk number, and the partition size is -1, meaning make that partition the full size of the disk. And then here's a loop identified again with an array. The first one we're going to assign the T drive letter, and then that's going to be disk 1, 2, and 3, E and F. So this is going to be our data drive, and then F will be our log drive. And the last step is we're going to format those disks using Windows.Win format module. The drive letter, we're just passing in the drive letter. We're going to use the REFS file system instead of NTFS. And then We're going to assign a label, which those labels are here and are defined in our loop array, TempDB, data, and log. And then the allocation unit size is going to be 64 KB. So let's go ahead and save that. And I'm going to go ahead and jump into the WSL window. And then I've already navigated into the location of where this playbook is. So Ansible for SQL Server DBAs, simple SQL Server install. And we're going to use the ansible-playbook command. -I is the inventory file, so we're going to pass in host.ini. Our playbook name is playbook diskprep.yml. The user I'm going to use is my domain account, so Luke at homelab.local, and then we're going to be presented for the password ask by using ask-pass. You'll see the first step, it's going to gather facts. So that's something typical of all playbooks, unless you specifically define not to gather facts. Ansible will go out and gather those default facts. And then the next one we're going to, so we just grabbed all the disk facts, and you can see here, actually I'll show you in just a second once it finishes. But the first disk it found, it's going to skip. That's our C drive because it already has a partition. But you can see the next one, it's changing disk. So any change that Ansible does, it will be presented like this. And then it's going to partition those disks. And then the last step is format those disks. So if we jump over to SRV1, we can now see that E and T have already been defined. And there's F, it just finished with the format. Same thing on SRV2. So you can see those disks have been formatted, partitioned, and initialized, and our playbook is finished. So you can see how powerful this would be if you had multiple machines that system admin may have just given you, and you need to configure. You can even start at the disk level of making sure that everything is formatted correctly for SQL Server. So each one of these tasks is output in our terminal window. So the first one was initialize disks, partition disk. We can see that there was 6 changes, 3 on each server, and then the format change or format disk. We can see that change 3, OK 6, and this is just the play recap. So let's scroll back up, and I wanted to show you these facts. So we'll just output for both servers, but let's take a look at Ansible facts. We can see that we're only getting disk 1, and then these are all the facts about that specific disk. We filtered on partition style, which was raw, meaning that it doesn't have a partition, and we also filtered on bus type, which was NVMe. In a later playbook, you'll see that we reference allocated size, or I'm sorry, not allocated size, but allocation unit size. We will actually check that before we install SQL Server to make sure that it's specified correctly. That's later down the road though, but that's just some ways that you can use these facts as looking at prerequisites before you do anything else, making sure that everything is correct before you start your installation. And if we run this playbook again, we can see that Ansible won't make any changes because it sees it's already in the current state, correct state. So we can see there were no changes, everything was okay. Change 0, skipped 1. So that's it for today's video. Again, if this is something that's of interest to you, automating using Ansible, and if you're a DBA or even a Windows admin that wants to get more information about using Ansible, be sure to subscribe to this channel. And again, check out the links below. And if you're interested in a course that will take you into more in depth, Of course, let me know if that's interested by signing up for the wait list. I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.